A Mafia kingpin sat in the dark, with the instinctive feeling that something wasn't right, until a 5-year-old girl, the daughter of the cleaning woman, climbed onto the chair beside him, touched his hand, and whispered, "Mr. Beck, she put something in your water." I saw it. That moment shattered everything. What followed was betrayal by his own blood, a ruthless wife plotting to bury her husband in darkness forever, and a single mother forced to make a life-or-death choice: stay silent to survive, or speak up and lose everything. But Camille hadn't counted on the little girl. And the truth. The Hale mansion sat in Chicago's Gold Coast, 4 stories tall, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a silence so heavy it could choke you the moment night fell. Beckett Hale sat in his study as he did every night, the light gone from his eyes for 8 months now, both hands resting on the cold arms of a leather chair. He'd once been the man Chicago didn't dare name after dark. Now he was the dark. Camille, his wife, always said she was taking care of him. Every morning she carried his medicine right to the bed, her voice sweet, her soft hand stroking his hair. Every night she kissed his forehead and said, "I love you. Get some rest." Then she walked out, her heels clicking with the steady rhythm of a countdown. And Garrett, his brother, stopped by every day, clapped him on the shoulder, laughed loud and easy, and said, "You just rest. I'll handle everything." Beckett didn't ask questions. He was tired. But that night, something shifted. Footsteps came softly. So soft. Softer than a mouse skittering over stone. Not Camille's heels. Not Garrett's leather shoes. These were bare feet, or close to it, small, hesitant, step by step toward him. What startled Beckett wasn't the sound, but the timing. Someone had waited. Someone had bided their time, lurking until Camille went upstairs. Garrett left the mansion, and Brenda had locked her door. Only when the house sank into total silence did those footsteps dare to approach, careful, frightened, as if this chance were both rare and dangerous. Then a voice rose. Very small, very clear. The voice of a child, "Mr." Beckett tilted his head. The old boss instinct snapped awake at once, who came into his room at 2 o'clock in the morning. "Mr., she put something into your glass of water." "I saw it." She stirred it and smiled. No hesitation, no joking. Only a certainty no 5-year-old should ever have to carry. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of Beckett's mouth. He'd heard enough lies in his life from enemies, from allies, from the very people he'd trusted most. A child in the middle of the night telling him his wife was poisoning him. Absurd. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cold, sharp. "I'm Penny. I'm Elise's daughter. My mom cleans your floors." He remembered then. The soft footsteps each night, the faint lullaby drifting down the hallway, the cleaning woman whose face he'd never truly seen. "Where did you hear that?" he asked. "I got lost upstairs. I hid behind the cabinet." The pretty lady talked to the tall man. Penny's voice trembled a little. She said medicine and eyes. The tall man laughed. Then she said accident. The little girl didn't understand everything she'd heard, but Beckett did. Every word, every fragment, locking into place in his mind like a tumbling key finding its teeth. She smiled, but her eyes didn't smile. "Mr.," Penny whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm scared of her." Something ancient and fragile inside Beckett cracked. His hands went rigid on the chair arms. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. 8 months. 8 months of sitting in darkness, drinking the medicine his wife brought him, believing what his brother said, letting a nurse control every hour of his day. 8 months of thinking he was only an unlucky man who'd lost the light. But he hadn't lost it. They took it. Before he could open his mouth, footsteps sounded on the stairs, steady, even. Camille. She was coming down. Penny shot to her feet, breath quick and shallow. The little girl grabbed his hand, her hand tiny, warm, trembling, and whispered close to his ear. "My mom will come to see you. My mom knows more than I do, but don't tell her. Don't tell anyone." Then the child vanished fast as she'd appeared. The soft patter of bare feet dissolved into the hallway shadows without a sound. The study door opened. The familiar scent of Chanel perfume poured in, sweet, expensive, and for the first time in his life, it made Beckett feel sick. "You're not asleep yet?" Camille asked, her voice gentle to perfection. Her soft hand settled on his shoulder. "Let me pour you some water." "No need," Beckett said. His voice was normal, not a ripple. He'd lived his whole life in the underworld. He knew how to hide an earthquake behind a smile. "Are you sure?" she asked. I'm sure. Go to bed. Camille kissed his forehead, lips cold, then walked out. Her heels tapped evenly on the marble, farther and farther away, until they disappeared. Beckett remained alone in the dark. But tonight the dark was different. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was a place where he could think, calculate, remember every sign he'd ignored for 8 months. He lifted his hand, the hand the little girl had just held. It was still warm, still trembling, and he realized that in a house full of people saying, I love you and I've got you, the only one who'd told him the truth was a 5-year-old child, the whole world treated as invisible. His mind stayed with that small voice, a voice that had seen through something even deeper than his blindness, and with the promise she carried, my mom will come to see you, like a thin sliver of light, fragile, but enough to keep him from letting go in the dark. This story, did it touch your emotions at all? If it did, please press the like button so the story can reach more people. Share this video with someone you love, because sometimes, just one story is enough to change a day. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now so you won't miss the stories that come next. No one in the Hale mansion knew what the night cleaning woman's real name was. To Brenda, she was the floor scrubbing girl. To Camille, she didn't even exist. Elise Warren, 27 years old, pale blonde hair twisted into a high bun, so thin her shoulder bones pressed against the fabric of an old t-shirt, eyes ringed dark from endless sleeplessness, and hands roughened and cracked by bleach and cleanser eating at her skin night after night. She'd been working the night shift in this mansion for 2 months, from 10 o'clock at night until 4 o'clock in the morning, mopping marble floors, polishing the stair railings by hand, wiping glass, vacuuming carpets, then disappearing before sunrise as if she'd never been there at all. That was exactly what Elise wanted. To disappear. For no one to see her. For no one to ask questions. For no one to know where she'd come from. 7 months earlier, she'd still been in Kentucky. A small house at the end of a red dirt road, curtains always drawn shut, the stench of cheap beer, and the echo of cursing spilling out every night. Travis Warren, her husband, had once been the boy who laughed the most in town. Then the factory closed, then beer, then whiskey, then fists. The first time he hit her, Elise believed it would be the last. By the 10th time, she stopped counting. She learned how to use makeup to hide bruises, learned how to smile when the neighbors asked, learned how to cook with one hand because the other had been twisted back and still hadn't healed. But there was one line Elise would never let anyone cross. Penny. That night, Travis was so drunk he couldn't stand straight, and he threw a whiskey bottle toward the dining table where Penny sat drawing. The bottle shattered 10 centimeters from the little girl's head. Shards of glass flew up into her hair. Penny didn't cry. She only closed her eyes, both arms wrapped tight around her picture as if it were the only thing left that could protect her. In that moment, something inside Elise died, and something else woke up. She waited until Travis collapsed on the kitchen floor, then lifted Penny up, stuffed into a backpack one change of clothes, a thin blanket, a teddy bear with a chipped nose, and $300 in tip money she'd hidden at the bottom of a detergent box for 2 years. She didn't leave a note. She didn't lock the door. She stepped out and didn't look back. The Greyhound bus from Louisville to Chicago took 7 hours. Penny sat in her mother's lap the entire ride, eyes wide as she stared out at the black window, not asking a single question. Only when the city lights began to glitter on the horizon did the little girl whisper, "Mom, where are we going?" Elise kissed her forehead and said, "Somewhere safe." She didn't know where that place was. She only knew it wasn't Kentucky. Chicago greeted them with the smell of bus exhaust and cold October rain. A rented room on the south side, 3rd floor, a window looking out over a garbage alley, walls blotched with damp mold, one twin bed for the 2 of them. Rent was $450 a month, nearly half her pay. Penny never asked for anything. She drew pictures on old newspaper with a pencil her mother had picked up from the church donation bin. No toys, no television, no friends. Every night before her mother left for work, Penny wrapped her arms around Elise's neck, kissed her cheek, and said, "Be careful, Mom. I'll be good." Then the little girl went next door to Miss Mabel's room, the 70-year-old neighbor who lived alone, who often coughed through the night, but always kept her door open for the 2 of them. Miss Mabel didn't take money to watch Penny. She only said, "I ran once too when I was young. Go on. I'll keep the little one with me." Every night at the Hale mansion, Elise cleaned in silence. She knew the rules. Don't look, don't listen, don't ask. She didn't know who Beckett Hale was, except that he was the owner of the house. He was blind, and he always sat alone in the first-floor study when the whole mansion had gone to sleep. She didn't want to know anything more, but there were nights when she pushed her cleaning cart past the half-closed oak door and heard his voice drift out, so soft it almost didn't feel real. Is anyone here? Not calling for someone in particular, not giving an order, just a question thrown into the dark, not expecting an answer. Elise froze outside the door. That voice, that loneliness. She knew it too well. It was her own voice every night when she returned to the rented room at 4 o'clock in the morning, sat on the cold floor, watched Penny sleeping, and whispered to herself into darkness no one could hear. She wanted to push the door open, wanted to say, "Yes, I'm here," but she didn't dare. She was only the cleaning woman. He was the owner of the house. And Elise had learned a long time ago that people like her weren't supposed to let anyone see them. She tightened her grip on the broom handle and kept walking, leaving that voice behind the half-closed door, along with the darkness both of them were trapped in, without even knowing it. 4 o'clock in the morning, Elise picked Penny up from the basement staff room, where the little girl lay curled on a folding chair waiting for her mother. Usually Penny would babble about everything on the walk home. The stray cat in the alley yesterday meowing. Miss Mabel teaching her how to fold towels into a bunny, or how she'd drawn a sun with hands and feet. But tonight the child was silent. Silent from the moment Elise guided her out of the mansion. Silent through the 3-block walk. Silent even as the cold November wind cut straight through her thin jacket. Penny was never silent unless she was afraid. Elise knew that with the instinct of a mother who'd had to read her child's silence like a danger signal for years of living with Travis. She stopped at the street corner, crouched down to Penny's eye level, and took the tiny hands that were trembling with cold. "Penny, sweetheart, is something wrong?" The little girl looked at her mother, big round eyes glimmering under the weak yellow streetlight, and then she spoke very softly, her voice shaking as if she might cry. "Mom, that pretty lady?" "She smiles, but her eyes don't smile. I'm scared of her." Elise held her breath. "The pretty lady. Camille, where did you see her?" Elise asked. Penny swallowed. "I went upstairs to look for you, and I got lost and went into the room with the light." The pretty lady was talking to the tall man, the one who laughs really loud. "Garrett, what did she say? Do you remember?" Elise asked. Penny frowned, trying to pull the words back with the scattered memory of a 5-year-old. She said medicine, then she said eyes. Then the tall man said Brenda's on schedule, and he laughed. Then she said, Penny stopped, gripping her mother's hand tighter. She said accident. She said it twice. Then she smiled. But that smile scared me so much, Mom. Elise straightened, and her knees nearly buckled. Her head spun. The broken pieces in Penny's words were snapping together like shards of glass, suddenly locking into a sharp, merciless picture. Medicine. Eyes. Brenda's on schedule. Accident. Camille and Garrett weren't taking care of Beckett. They were poisoning him. The pills Brenda brought every night weren't medicine. Beckett's blindness hadn't just happened, and that accident Camille kept saying might be an accident that already happened, or worse, an accident that was about to happen. Elise's heart pounded so hard she could hear each beat in her ears. 2 voices screamed inside her at the same time. One voice was familiar, the voice that had kept her alive for 7 months. Not our business. We need this job. $450 for rent. Penny needs milk, needs a warm coat, needs a roof. Don't get involved. Don't look. Pull the curtain closed. The other voice was smaller, weaker, but stubborn, refusing to go out. He's being killed, slowly, every night, 1 pill at a time, and you know. Penny tugged at her sleeve. Mom, can we go home now? I'm cold. Elise looked down at her daughter, so small, shivering, her worn canvas shoes split open at the toes. And she understood she didn't have the right to be a hero. She only had the right to be a mother. She lifted Penny into her arms, held her tight against her chest, and walked fast toward the rented room. She didn't look back. She didn't think any further. She would go home, lock the door, tuck her child under a blanket, and pretend tonight had never happened. Pretend she hadn't heard anything. Pretend she didn't know anything. Pretend she was as good at pretending as she'd been for years. Pretending the bruises on her face came from walking into a door. 3 days passed, and Elise became frighteningly good at pretending. She changed her cleaning route, starting on the 3rd floor, moving down to the 2nd, and finishing in the kitchen area and the service hallway, avoiding the entire 1st floor where Beckett's study was. She didn't pass that half-closed oak door anymore. She didn't stop to listen. She didn't allow herself to think. She scrubbed floors, wrung out rags, dumped dirty water, repeated the same motions, like a machine with no feelings at all, but the Hale mansion wouldn't let her forget. On the 1st night, she was wiping the 2nd floor hallway glass when she saw Brenda walking below, a silver tray in her hands, moving with steady purpose toward Beckett's room at exactly 11 o'clock, like she did every night. On the tray sat a glass of water, a small bottle of pills, and the professional smile of someone who'd been doing this for a long time. Elise gripped the window cloth until her knuckles tightened, her eyes tracking Brenda until she disappeared behind the door. On the 2nd night, she was vacuuming the hallway carpet when she heard laughter drifting from the living room. Camille and Garrett sat on the sofa with 2 glasses of wine, Camille's voice light as she said something Elise couldn't quite make out, and then Garrett nodded, raised his glass to clink his sister-in-law's, and the 2 of them laughed. Elise turned away. On the 3rd night, she accidentally saw something that made her stomach clamp tight. Camille was holding Beckett's hand as she led him from the dining room toward the bedroom, her voice soft and sweet. "Watch the step, my love." Her hand rested at his back, the picture of a perfect wife. But Elise saw Camille's eyes. Those eyes weren't on her husband. Those eyes were on the wall clock hanging behind his back. Beckett moved one slow step at a time, his cane tapping lightly over the marble, his face angled forward, but seeing nothing, not seeing the false smile on his wife's mouth, not seeing the impatience in her gaze, not seeing that he was being guided like a puppet on strings called love. Elise stood at the stair corner, both hands locked around the broom handle until her fingers went white. Then she slipped back into the shadows, turned away, and kept cleaning. But that night, as she washed her hands in the staff area sink, she looked down at her reddened hands under the cold running water, and the memory hit without warning. The kitchen floor in that Kentucky house, the sharp, metallic stink of blood, her left cheek pressed to icy tile, copper taste in her mouth. Travis stood over her, panting, half of a broken bottle still in his hand. Elise didn't look at him. She looked at the window across the way. Mrs. Henderson, the 60-year-old neighbor, stood at her own window, eyes wide, staring straight into Elise's kitchen through a gap in the curtain. She saw everything, the blood, the broken glass, the child crying in the corner. Then Mrs. Henderson lifted her hand and slowly pulled the curtain closed. The old flowered curtain covered the window completely. Her room light went off. No one called the police. Not ever. Elise twisted the faucet harder, letting the cold water run over her fingers until they went numb. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall, face pale, eyes bruised with exhaustion, and she whispered to herself in a voice choked with bitterness, "I'm pulling the curtain closed too." At 4 o'clock in the morning, she picked Penny up and walked home in silence. Penny sat on the bed and pulled from her backpack an old newspaper sheet covered in drawing, a pencil picture, a man sitting on a chair, his eyes shaded in solid black, darkness all around him, heavy scribbled strokes filling the space. But above the man's head, Penny had drawn a tiny star, 5 uneven points, pressed darker than anything else on the page, as if she'd poured all her strength into that one star. "Mom, this is the blind man," Penny said, placing the drawing on her mother's lap. "He's so sad, Mom. It's all dark around him. Why doesn't anybody help him?" Elise held the picture, stared at the pencil man sitting alone in the dark her daughter had drawn, stared at the small star hanging above him like a 5-year-old's prayer, believing there had to be light somewhere. Elise's tears fell onto the newspaper and smeared the graphite. She pulled Penny into her arms, unable to speak. That night she didn't sleep. She lay staring at the mold-stained ceiling, the drawing resting on her chest, listening to Penny's steady breathing beside her, and she heard more clearly than she had in 3 days the voice she'd tried to block out, a voice that wasn't Penny's, wasn't Beckett's, but her own, rising in the darkness of that damp, rented room. "Am I going to be Mrs. Henderson, or am I going to be the one who opens the door?" On the 4th night, Elise didn't change her cleaning route. She cleaned from the 3rd floor down like always, but when she reached the 2nd floor, instead of turning toward the kitchen area, her feet carried her straight down the staircase to the 1st floor. She didn't plan it. She didn't prepare a single sentence to say. She only knew that last night she'd lain there holding Penny's drawing of the star and couldn't sleep. That this morning when Penny asked, "Mom, are you happy today?" she couldn't answer, that she'd looked into the mirror and seen Mrs. Henderson's face staring back at her. She didn't walk to Beckett's study because she was brave. She walked there because she couldn't stand the silence inside herself anymore, because every night when she lay down, she heard Penny's voice in her head. Why doesn't anybody help him? And that question was eating her alive from the inside like acid. Slowly, steadily, impossible to stop. 2:00 in the morning. The first floor hallway was empty. The faint yellow glow of nightlights cast long shadows across the marble. Elise stopped in front of the oak door, the thin line of light leaking from the gap beneath it, telling her someone was still awake inside. She lifted her hand, her fist suspended in the air, her heart pounding so hard she could hear each beat echoing in her ears. She could turn around right now. Turn around, finish the hallway, pick up Penny, go home, pretend. Her fingers trembled. Then she knocked. 2 soft knocks, just loud enough to be heard. No more. "Mr. Hale, it's Elise, the cleaning woman." Her voice shook so badly she almost didn't recognize it herself. Inside, silence stretched until it felt suffocating. Then Beckett's voice came. Not surprised, not sleepy. Only the sharp wakefulness of a man who'd been awake for too many nights. "Come in." Elise pushed the door open. The study was dark, lit only by a small desk lamp someone kept on out of habit, even though its owner didn't need light. Beckett sat in his familiar leather chair, back straight, both hands on the armrests. His clouded eyes angled toward the doorway with a terrifying precision, even though he couldn't see a thing. Elise realized he hadn't just woken up. He was waiting. Not waiting for her, but waiting for something he'd sensed since 3 nights ago, since a 5-year-old child had stepped into the darkness and told him the truth. For 3 nights, Beckett hadn't slept. He lay in bed, pretending to breathe evenly while Camille lay beside him, pretending to be deeply under when Brenda checked on him. But his mind was working the way it hadn't worked since the day he lost his sight. He began to notice what he'd ignored for 8 months. The pill Brenda brought each night, he took it, rolled it between 2 fingers, felt its shape, its size, its surface. In the first month, the pill had been smooth, round, small. Now it was slightly longer, its surface scored with a groove that hadn't been there before. No one changes a patient's medication without telling him, unless they don't want him to know. He started listening harder. Camille talked on the phone in the hallway, her voice sweet when she knew he was nearby. But once she thought he was asleep and her voice changed completely. Cold, urgent, sharp. The voice of someone discussing business, not a wife worrying over a sick husband. And Garrett. His brother came every day, clapped his shoulder, laughed loud. But Beckett realized Garrett never asked what he wanted anymore. Garrett only announced, "I signed this. I approved that. I met with this person for you." Piece by piece, it all clicked into place with what the child had said that night. Beckett didn't believe it completely. He'd lived too long in a world where everyone had a motive, where kindness always came with a price, where even a child could be sent by someone to test his reaction. But he couldn't deny it. Something was wrong. And tonight, the woman the child had said, "My mom will come see you," was standing in front of him. Elise told him. She told him what Penny had overheard, what she herself had seen over 2 months working here without daring to think too deeply. Brenda delivering the medicine at the exact time every night, like carrying out an assignment. Camille controlling everything Beckett ate and drank and touched. Garrett gradually taking over every decision in his place. She spoke fast, her voice trembling, her fingers digging into the hem of her shirt, her eyes fixed on the floor even though he couldn't see her. When she stopped, the room sank into a silence heavy as lead. Then Beckett spoke, not in the voice of a blind man sitting in a chair waiting for pity. This was the boss's voice, ice cold, each word sharp as a blade cutting wood. "Do you know who I am? Do you know how people end when they try to play with me? If someone sent you here to probe my reaction, if this is a game, I promise you, you won't walk out of this room." Elise stepped back. Survival screamed in her head. Run, run now, get back to Penny. Lock the door, never come back. But her legs didn't listen. She stayed where she was, shaking from head to toe, tears running that she didn't wipe away, and she said in a voice that broke but didn't retreat another inch, "I don't know who you are. I only know who I am. I'm a mother trying to do the right thing even though I'm scared to death. I've got a 5-year-old child asleep in the basement waiting for me every night. I've got nothing to take from you. I don't even have enough money to buy my child a warm coat." Beckett went silent. He listened to her breathing, Quick, shallow, uneven. He listened to the tremor in her voice. Not the kind of tremor an actress makes, but the tremor of someone standing in front of something far bigger than herself and knowing she could be crushed. He'd heard hundreds of lies in his life. A liar controls the voice, controls the breath, but can't control the shaking inside the silence between sentences. This woman was truly afraid, and someone who's truly afraid doesn't lie like this. But Beckett Hale hadn't survived to 36 years old in the underworld by trusting a stranger at 2 o'clock in the morning. He needed more than that. "Leave," he said, his voice returning to normal. Not warm and not cold, only final. "Don't come back into this room." Elise swallowed hard, nodded even though he couldn't see it, then turned and walked out. The oak door closed behind her with a soft sound. Elise leaned her back against the hallway wall, her legs buckling, both hands clamped over her mouth so she wouldn't break into loud sobs. She'd done it. She'd said it, and he'd sent her away. Inside the study, Beckett didn't move. His right hand gripped the armrest tight. His left hand rested on his thigh, his palm still feeling the ghost of the small, warm hand the child had used to hold his finger the night before, hidden in his breast pocket. He'd sent Elise away, but he didn't forget. Every word she'd spoken was carving itself into his mind like a knife mark in wood. The seed had been planted, and in the darkness where Beckett sat, it had already begun to sprout. The next night, Elise cleaned the 3rd floor as usual, trying not to think about the 1st floor study and that steel, cold voice from the night before. She'd said it. He'd sent her out. That was it. She would work, collect her pay, raise Penny, and forget. But as she wrung out a rag over the water bucket in the 2nd floor hallway, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Not Brenda, not Camille. It was one of the night staff Elise recognized by face but didn't know by name. The person walked past, stopped, and delivered one single sentence without meeting Elise's eyes. "Mr. Hale wants the study cleaned again. Now." Then the person kept walking. Elise stood frozen beside the bucket of dirty water. He was calling for her. She wasn't seeking him out. He was seeking her. Her heart beat fast as she went down the staircase to the 1st floor, each step feeling twice as long as it should. Penny was sitting in the basement staff room because Miss Mabel was still sick, coughing worse than she had been the past few days, unable to watch her. Elise didn't want to bring Penny upstairs, but she couldn't leave the child alone in the cold basement at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. She went back down, lifted Penny into her arms, the little girl's arms looping around her mother's neck, eyes half closed, hair messy with sleep. When Elise pushed open the oak door, Beckett sat in the same place as always, back straight, hands on the chair arms, but something was different. Not his posture. The air. Last night the room had smelled of threat. Tonight it smelled of calculation. He hadn't called her in because he trusted her. He'd called her in because he needed one final test. And the tool for that test wasn't Elise. It was Penny. "Put the child down," Beckett said. His voice not as cold as the night before, but not warm either, only calm in a way that was terrifying. Elise set Penny on the small sofa beside the desk. The little girl was fully awake now, sitting up straight, looking around the room with wide, curious eyes, then turning toward the man in the big leather chair. "Mr. Beck," Penny said, delighted like she was seeing someone familiar, completely unafraid even though she was in a Mafia boss's study at 2 o'clock in the morning. Beckett tilted his head. The name Mr. Beck the little girl had invented for him on the first night made the corner of his mouth shift, but he reined it in at once. He wasn't here to feel anything. He was here to find the truth. "Penny," he said, his voice gentler with the child than it had been with Elise the night before, but still clear, slow, each word placed carefully. "Tell me, that night you hid behind the cabinet, did you see anything else? Besides the pretty lady and the tall man?" Penny tilted her head, her small feet swinging above the floor as she tried to remember. Then her eyes lit up. "I saw the nurse too. Miss Brenda. Not in that room. In her room." Beckett leaned forward slightly. "Her room. I was looking for Mom, and I got lost by a room with the door open. Miss Brenda was in there. She opened a little cabinet with a lock. She used a key." Penny lifted her hand and mimed turning a key. She took out a tiny bottle, smaller than my finger. Not the regular medicine bottle. The regular medicine bottle is on the table. I saw it. It's big, and it has paper on it. This one was different. Really small. no paper on it. She hid it in her pocket, then locked the cabinet again, and then she went upstairs. Elise stood by the door, not breathing. She hadn't known this part. Penny had never told her. This wasn't something Elise had coached her to say. This was something the child remembered on her own, a scattered little shard of memory from a 5-year-old wandering through a big house, noticing what she saw and holding it until the right question unlocked it. Beckett sank back into his chair. A private locked cabinet, an unlabeled bottle, hidden in a pocket, carried upstairs to his room. If it were ordinary medicine, no one would need a separate locked cabinet. No one would need an unlabeled bottle. No one would need to hide it like evidence. He turned his head toward where Elise was standing. His voice changed. Not the boss's voice now, only the voice of a man trying to stay steady in front of what he was about to admit. "What do you want?" Elise gave a small shake of her head even though he couldn't see it. "I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. Money, protection. What do you need me to do for you?" "No, I just want to finish my shift and go home to my child." Elise's voice was small, tired, carrying no weight of bargaining or strategy, only the weight of the simplest truth. She was an exhausted mother, and she wanted to go home. Beckett stayed silent for a long time. Penny sat on the sofa, feet swinging, watching the grown-ups not speak, not understanding why the room felt so heavy. Then Beckett spoke. His voice was thick, slow, each word pulled from somewhere deep inside him that he didn't want to touch. "If what you're saying is true, if what the little girl is saying is true." Then he stopped, breathed in, breathed out, and when he continued, his voice cracked slightly on the last word, "Then my wife is killing me." The room fell into silence. Penny looked up, her big eyes suddenly worried, then climbed down from the sofa, walked over to Beckett's chair, and offered her tiny hand to curl around one of his fingers. She didn't say anything. She only held on, and Beckett, the fallen king of the city's shadows, didn't pull his hand away. He let that 5-year-old hand hold his finger. Warm, small, real. And he understood that after 3 nights, after 3 rounds of listening, the strongest proof wasn't Elise's story, wasn't the pill changing shape, wasn't Camille's cold voice on the phone. The strongest proof was this hand. A hand that didn't know calculation, didn't know motive, didn't know how to lie. The hand of a 5-year-old girl holding on to him in the dark and asking for nothing at all. From that night on, everything changed without anyone in the Hale mansion realizing it. Every night, after Camille went upstairs, after Garrett left, after Brenda locked her bedroom door, Elise stopped cleaning for 20 to 30 minutes and quietly stepped into the first-floor study. She didn't knock anymore. She only had to push the oak door open just a little, step inside, and Beckett would already be there waiting, back straight in the leather chair, his ears recognizing her footsteps from the far end of the hallway, footsteps he'd memorized over several nights, light, steady, with a slight drag on the left foot because one sole of her worn shoes was thinner than the other. Beckett couldn't see anything, but he needed to know everything, and Elise became his eyes. On the first night, he asked, "Who does Camille call when she thinks no one can hear?" Elise told him that tonight she'd seen Camille standing on the second-floor balcony, phone pressed to her ear, her voice a whisper but urgent, and Elise had caught a few words. Lawyer, power of attorney, end of the month. On the second night, what does Garrett carry in his briefcase when he comes? Elise paid attention. The brown leather bag Garrett brought every day looked thicker than usual, and when he set it on the living room table, the corner of a stack of documents slid out, and Elise glimpsed a bold printed line on the first page but couldn't read it in time. On the third night, what time does Brenda take the medicine? From where? And which way does she carry it? Elise began recording every detail in her mind. Brenda went into her own room at 10:45, locked the door, and 15 minutes later came out with the silver tray, walked straight up to the second floor, and knocked on Beckett's door at exactly 11 o'clock. Every night Elise came in, reported, and Beckett listened without interrupting, his hands gripping the chair arms, his face blank but his jaw clenched so hard the muscle stood out. He was assembling the picture his wife and brother had been building for 8 months, and every piece Elise brought made the picture clearer, uglier, and more painful. Penny came with her mother every night because Miss Mabel was still coughing badly and couldn't watch her. The little girl sat in the sofa corner, drawing with a pencil on newspaper, sometimes lifting her head to look at the blind boss, and then lowering it to draw again. Quiet, obedient, so easy to forget there was a child in the room. But Beckett didn't forget. He heard the pencil's soft scrape over paper, heard Penny's light breathing when she focused, heard her whisper to herself, "The sun has to be more yellow," even though her pencil only had one color. And every time he heard it, something rigid inside him softened a little, even though he never let it show. Then came the night Elise walked in, and her voice was different, not trembling with fear like the first time, not calm and reporting like the past few nights. Her voice was thick, caught, like someone trying to swallow something bigger than her throat could hold. She sat in the chair across from him and started to speak the way she always did, but after 2 sentences she stopped. Beckett tilted his head. "You're crying." Not a question, a statement. He couldn't see her swollen red eyes. He couldn't see her hands crushing the hem of her shirt into wrinkles, but he could hear it. Everything he needed was in the sound of her voice. Elise was quiet for a moment. Then she told him, her voice breaking. The landlord had taped a warning notice to the door, 2 months behind, deadline this weekend. If she didn't pay, she'd be out on the street. Tonight, before she left for work, Penny had looked at the paper on the door and asked in a tone so calm it split Elise open. "Mom, are we going to sleep outside soon?" Elise didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. Beckett didn't speak either. He only sat there, his face turned toward her, his cloudy eyes seeing nothing. And yet Elise felt as if he was seeing through her more clearly than anyone with bright eyes ever had. Then he said, "Keep going. What did you see tonight?" That was all. No comfort, no promises, only pulling her back to work, back to something she could control, instead of drowning in what she couldn't. The next morning, when Elise opened the employee locker to grab her things before leaving, she found a white envelope tucked neatly on top of the coat she'd folded inside. No name, no note. Inside was cash, enough to cover 2 months of rent with a little left over. Elise stood by the locker, with the envelope in her hand, tears dropping onto the tile floor she didn't wipe away. She knew who it was from. In this mansion, there was only one person who knew what she'd said the night before, and only one person who could make an envelope appear in her locker without anyone asking questions. She didn't say thank you. He wouldn't want to hear it. That night, Penny carried a new drawing into Beckett's study. She'd drawn a big round sun, taking up half the page, rays stretching out in 8 directions, and beneath it, a man sitting in a chair, with crooked pencil letters in a child's unsteady hand. "You will see again." Penny placed the picture on Beckett's lap. "I drew it for you." Beckett held the paper, his fingers moving slowly over the rough newspaper surface, feeling the pencil grooves where she'd pressed hard, feeling the uneven raised bumps of her letters, and he didn't speak for a long time. Then he folded the drawing carefully, opened the hidden drawer beneath his desk where he kept his most important things, placed the drawing inside, and locked it. He didn't say thank you, but Penny didn't need him to. She smiled, went back to the sofa corner, took a fresh sheet, and started drawing again. That night, Beckett began pretending to take his medicine. When Brenda brought the tray at 11, he lifted the water glass, raised the pill to his mouth, tilted his head back, and swallowed. But the pill stayed under his tongue. When Brenda turned away, he spat the pill into a handkerchief, folded it, and tucked it under his pillow. The next morning, Elise came 15 minutes early, went into the room, took the handkerchief, and slipped the pill into a small pouch she carried. Back at the rented room, she put the pill into an old shoebox under the bed, where 7 pills from the previous 7 nights already lay, each wrapped separately in a tissue, dated in ballpoint ink on the paper. Evidence, fragile and tiny, hidden in a worn shoebox under the bed in a damp Southside room. But the only thing that could prove Beckett Hale was being poisoned by the very people who told him they loved him most. Every night, as Elise left the room, Penny always looked back and waved. "Good night, Mr. Beck." And every night Beckett nodded toward that small voice, the corner of his mouth lifting even as he tried to hide it. 3 of them met each night in that dark room, and no one said it out loud, but all of them felt it. The blind man was gaining new eyes. The woman who'd been running was finding new shelter, and the 5-year-old who'd never had a whole family was drawing more and more pictures with 3 people standing side by side. No one used the word family. But the way Beckett listened to the soft scratch of Penny's pencil in the middle of the night, the way Elise slipped the rent money envelope into the drawer without a word, the way Penny waved to him each night and then held her mother's hand as they walked back into the dark, all of it said it for them. Camille wasn't stupid. She didn't become the woman who controlled a mafia boss with beauty or tears. She did it with observation, with the ability to read people the way other women read a magazine, with the instinct to sense the moment something slipped out of her grasp, even by a millimeter. And this week, something was slipping. Beckett had changed, not in a big way, not in an obvious way, not the kind of change an ordinary person would notice. But Camille wasn't ordinary. She noticed Beckett reacted faster to sounds, his head turning toward whoever spoke almost immediately, instead of lagging by half a beat the way it had for weeks. He dozed off less during the day. He ate more. And once, just once, when Camille passed the study in the late afternoon, she saw him sitting in his chair, and the corner of his mouth lifted, barely, almost nothing, but it was a smile. Beckett Hale hadn't smiled in 8 months. So who was making him smile? That night, Camille called Brenda into her private room and shut the door. "What is the little cleaning girl doing every night?" Brenda frowned. "Cleaning. Like always." Camille stared at her with unblinking cold eyes. "Follow her. Tonight. Everywhere she goes, every room she enters. Report back to me." Brenda nodded. She didn't ask why. In this house, when Camille gave an order, nobody asked why. Night fell. Elise cleaned the 3rd floor and then the 2nd like she always did. But she didn't know that tonight there were eyes behind her. Brenda moved quietly. Soft shoes with rubber soles making no sound on the stone, always keeping just enough distance to watch the cleaning woman without being seen. At 11 o'clock, Brenda delivered the medicine to Beckett as she did every night, watched him take it, noted it, then returned to her own room and waited. She knew that if the cleaning woman did anything unusual, it would be after midnight, when the mansion sank fully into silence. 1:45 in the morning. Elise pushed open the oak door to Beckett's study and stepped inside. Penny was dozing on the sofa in the basement staff room. Because tonight Miss Mabel was a little better and had gone to sleep early, and Elise didn't dare wake her, so she left Penny downstairs. Elise sat in the chair across from Beckett and began to speak softly. Tonight Camille made 2 calls, the first at 9, the second at 10:30, both times on the balcony, her voice a whisper. Garrett's bag was thicker today. He left at 8 but came back at 10, went straight into the living room to meet Camille. The two of them talked for about 20 minutes, and only then did Garrett leave for good. Elise was halfway through her 3rd sentence when Beckett suddenly lifted a hand, palm open, signaling silence. Elise stopped instantly. She looked at him and saw his nostrils flare slightly, his head tipping a fraction to the left, his cloudy eyes useless, but his whole body tightening like a drawn wire. He was listening, not to her, to something else. Then he smelled it. Gardenia. Light, sweet, drifting through the crack of the half-closed door. Brenda's perfume. Beckett recognized that scent because Brenda was the one person close to him every day. Gardenia clung to his pillow, to the water glass she carried, to her wrist when she took his blood pressure. And that scent was right outside the door. In 1 second, Beckett reached across the space between their chairs, closed his hand around Elise's wrist, and pulled her closer. Elise almost made a sound, but his grip was firm enough that she understood at once. Quiet. He leaned in until his mouth was near her ear, his breath warm against her skin as he whispered so softly it was barely a sound. "Someone's listening outside. Wipe the desk." Normal. Elise went rigid. Her heart slammed so hard it felt violent, but his hand still held her wrist, steady, warm, not squeezing to hurt, only holding, as if to say, "I'm here. Do what I say. You'll be okay." She looked down at his hand on her wrist and something broke open in her chest. Not because she was afraid of Brenda, not because she was terrified of being caught, but because this was the first time since she'd run from Kentucky that a man's hand had touched her, and it wasn't meant to cause pain. Travis's hand had always grabbed her with the strength of a man who wanted to control, twist, hold, crush. Beckett's hand held her with the strength of a man who wanted to protect. Elise swallowed hard, eased her wrist free, stood, took the cleaning cloth from the table, and began wiping the wooden desktop, slow, ordinary, exactly the way she did every night. The door opened a crack. Brenda stood in the doorway, her eyes sweeping the room fast. Beckett sat in his chair, head tipped to one side as if he'd dozed off. The cleaning woman was wiping the desk, face down. Nothing strange. Brenda watched for 3 more seconds, then turned away, her rubber-soled footsteps fading down the hall. When the footsteps were gone and the gardenia scent thinned in the air, Beckett opened his eyes, though it changed nothing he could see. He spoke quietly, his voice low. From now on, be more careful. Don't stay in here more than 10 minutes each time. Change the hour you come. And you, he paused, as if weighing every word. I don't want you in danger. Elise stood by the desk, cloth still in her hand, looking at the blind man in the dark, worrying about her safety. Her, the cleaning woman, the invisible one, the one the world could erase and never notice. But he noticed. He didn't just notice she existed. He noticed she could be hurt. That sentence, I don't want you in danger. Travis had said things like that too. I just want to protect you. But in Travis's mouth it was a chain, and in Beckett's voice Elise heard something she'd forgotten the sound of a long time ago. Truth. She nodded even though he couldn't see it, then stepped out and closed the door gently. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Elise carried Penny, still half asleep, up from the basement, walked out the back gate of the mansion, and headed toward the rented room like she did every night. But when she turned into the alley 2 blocks from home, she realized something was wrong. A black car sat parked at the end of the alley, lights off, engine off. But she saw a red dot blinking inside. Someone smoking. That car hadn't been there yesterday morning. It hadn't been there last week. Elise walked faster, held Penny tighter against her chest. The little girl stirred and mumbled in her sleep. Elise didn't look back, but she could feel eyes following her. Heavy, cold, the kind of stare she knew too well from the years with Travis. The stare of someone watching. She didn't go to the rented room. She went straight to Miss Mabel's door, knocked softly, knocked again and again until the old woman opened it, eyes narrowed, coughing. Miss Mabel, can we sleep here tonight? Please, Miss. Mabel looked at Elise's terrified eyes and didn't ask a single question. She only opened the door wider. Elise stepped in, locked the door, pulled the curtain closed, then sat on the floor holding Penny, her back against the wall, her eyes fixed on the locked door. She didn't know who was sitting in that black car. But she knew one thing. Someone had started paying attention to her. And in Beckett Hale's world, attention was never a good thing. The next night, Elise knew she shouldn't go to work. Her forehead had been burning since late afternoon, chills running through her body, her arms and legs weak and rubbery, and every time she swallowed it felt like swallowing razor blades. Miss. Mabel touched Elise's forehead and shook her head. You've got a high fever. Stay home. But Elise didn't have the right to be sick. Missing one night meant losing $45. $45 was milk for Penny for a whole week. The electric bill. Half a box of cold medicine from the dollar store. She took the last 2 Tylenol tablets from the bottle, put on an extra layer, carried Penny over to Miss Mabel's, and left. But tonight, Miss Mabel's coughing came back hard. So hard she couldn't sit upright. And Elise couldn't bring herself to leave Penny there. She took her daughter with her, like the nights before, hoping her body would hold on until 4 o'clock in the morning. Her body didn't hold on. By 1 o'clock, while she was mopping the staircase from the 2nd floor down to the 1st, Elise's knees gave out. She sat on the step, her back against the wall, the mop slipping from her hands and rolling down several steps with a clattering sound in the empty hallway. Sweat soaked the back of her shirt, her face flushed red, her breathing quick and shallow, her vision blurring. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't listen. She sat there on the icy marble steps of $1 million mansion that wasn't hers, and thought that if she collapsed here, who would pick Penny up from the basement staff room in the morning? Penny didn't know her mother was sitting on the stairs gasping for air. The little girl was in the basement staff room, curled on the folding chair, but she wasn't asleep. She heard the mop fall through the ventilation shaft and knew the sound came from the staircase. She knew her mother was on the stairs, and she knew her mother was sick because earlier her mother had been hot when she hugged her. Hotter than that time Mom got the flu back in Kentucky and couldn't get out of bed for 2 days. Penny climbed down from the chair, barefoot on the cold concrete, opened the staff room door. But instead of going up the stairs to find her mother, she turned into the 1st floor hallway and went straight to the familiar oak door and pushed it open. Beckett was sitting inside, awake, like every night. He heard the tiny footsteps and knew at once. Not Elise. Lighter, shorter, bare feet. Penny, he called softly. Mr. Beck. Penny's voice trembled, not from cold but from worry. My mom is sick. She's really hot. She's sitting on the stairs. Beckett didn't ask anything else. He rose from his chair, one hand on his cane, the other reaching out. Penny ran to him and wrapped her little hand around his index and middle finger, gripping tight, and then she pulled. The blind boss followed the 5-year-old out of the room into the dark hallway. Penny's steps were small and quick, pattering over the stone. Beckett's steps were longer and heavier, his cane tapping in a steady rhythm. It was the strangest sight the Hale mansion would ever hold, and no one witnessed it. A child leading a kingpin through the dark. No lights, no sound, only two uneven rhythms echoing over the marble. Penny led him to the foot of the stairs. Elise sat on the 5th step, her head tipped against the wall, eyes shut, sweat beading across her forehead. She heard the cane and opened her eyes, seeing Beckett standing in front of her, Penny clinging beside him. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry. I'm just resting for a minute, and then—" Beckett didn't let her finish. He braced on the cane and slowly lowered himself to his knees on the staircase, one knee touching the cold marble, then the other. The man whose name once silenced entire rooms was kneeling in front of the cleaning woman on the stairs of his own mansion. He lifted his hand and pressed the back of it to Elise's forehead, feeling the heat scorching through her skin. "You've got a high fever. You shouldn't be here." His voice wasn't an order, wasn't blame, only heavy with something Elise didn't dare give a name. Elise shook her head, her voice thin. "If I don't work, tomorrow there's no money to buy penny milk. Missing one night costs $45. I don't have $45 to lose." Beckett went quiet, for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice low and heavy, each word landing like stone. "No one should have to live like this." Not pity, not charity. Rage. Rage that a mother had to drag herself out to scrub someone else's floors with a fever of 40 degrees so her daughter could drink milk tomorrow. Rage that the world he lived in, the world he ruled, allowed this to happen under his roof while he didn't know, or worse, didn't bother to know. Penny stood beside them, looking at her mother slumped and Mr. Beck on his knees, and then she reached into her tiny coat pocket and pulled out a pebble. It was small, no bigger than the tip of a thumb, picked up outside the preschool yard when she walked past the day before, round and smooth, wrapped with a red thread Penny had wound around it herself, clumsy and uneven, knotted in some places and loose in others, but she'd wrapped it carefully, patiently, like she was bundling the most important gift in her life. "Mr. Beck," Penny said, placing the pebble into his palm. "My mom says when you're sad you should hold something tight. Hold it really tight, and you won't feel so sad. You keep this. I'm giving it to you." Beckett held the pebble. Small, light, warm from sitting in the child's pocket all day. The rough red thread under his fingers. He closed his fist around it, hard, and tears fell. No sobbing, no sound. Just water sliding from eyes that couldn't see anymore. Silently down his cheek, down his chin, dropping onto the marble where no one heard it except the child standing in front of him. "Mr. Beck, do you have a kid?" Penny asked, head tilted, the simple curiosity of a 5-year-old. Silence. A long time. Long enough that Elise lifted her head to look at him even though she barely had strength. Then Beckett answered, his voice breaking where he didn't want it to break. "Yes, a son, but he's gone and illness took him 3 years ago." He didn't say more. Elise didn't ask. But the way he said the words "he's gone," like they were a wound that had never healed and he'd just touched it after so long avoiding it, told Elise more than any long story ever could. Penny looked at him, not fully understanding death, but understanding he was sad. Sad in a way different from being blind. Sad deeper. Sad in the place you can't fix. She held both hands out, took his hand that was 4 times the size of hers, and said in the gentlest, simplest, truest voice this mansion had ever heard, "Then you have a kid now. You have me." Beckett pulled Penny into his arms, the Mafia boss on his knees on the staircase of his own mansion, holding a 5-year-old child, the cleaning woman's daughter, his arms wrapping around her tiny body, and he held her not because of a deal, not because of calculation, not because she was useful to any plan. He held her because he needed to. Because for 8 months of darkness, for years of power and fear and loneliness, no one had said that to him. No one had given him a pebble wrapped in thread. No one had held his hand and said, "You have me," and truly stayed. Elise sat on the step with her fever and blurred eyes, watching her daughter in the arms of a blind boss, and she cried. Not from pain, because for the first time since running from Kentucky, she saw Penny being held by a man her child didn't fear. Brenda went into Beckett's room at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when he was lying on the bed for his nap after the morning dose, the one he'd hidden under his tongue and spat into a handkerchief the moment she turned her back. He was truly asleep, worn out after too many late nights, and he didn't hear Brenda open the drawer of his desk. She wasn't rummaging at random. Camille had ordered it. After the night Brenda saw the cleaning woman in Beckett's room the week before, Camille hadn't been satisfied with. She was just wiping the table. Camille wanted more, and Brenda knew how to find it. The first drawer held old papers, nothing. The second drawer was locked, but Brenda had a spare key, because she was the one who managed Beckett's medication and schedule, and the keys to every drawer in this room were in the key ring she kept. Brenda opened the second drawer, flipped past a few notebooks, an old watch, and then her hand touched a sheet of newspaper folded into quarters. She unfolded it, a pencil drawing on old newsprint, a big, round sun taking up half the page, 8 rays stretching outward, and beneath it a man sitting on a chair, and a child's messy scrawl that read, "You'll see again." Brenda stared at the drawing, looked at Beckett sleeping, then folded the newspaper back up, slipped it into her pocket, locked the drawer, and stepped out without a sound. 15 minutes later, the drawing lay on Camille's vanity. Camille held the newspaper between 2 fingers as if it were something filthy, read the words, studied the clumsy lines, and understood at once. It wasn't the cleaning woman wiping a table in her husband's room. It was the little girl. The child of that cleaning woman had gotten close enough to Beckett to give him a drawing, close enough that he'd hidden it in a locked drawer the way a man hides something precious. Camille didn't know exactly what the two of them had said to each other, but she didn't need to know. She only needed to know one thing. Someone was getting near her husband without her control, and in Camille's plan, Beckett Hale was not allowed to have anyone near him except the people she chose. That night, at 11 o'clock, Elise was mopping the second-floor hallway when a housemaid came to tell her to go downstairs and see Mrs. Hale in the living room. Elise set the mop aside, wiped her hands on her apron, and went down the stairs with a heavy, sinking feeling in her gut. Camille stood in the middle of the living room in a black silk nightgown, her hair down, her eyes cold as 2 glass marbles. Brenda stood beside her, arms folded. No one else was there. "You brought your child to your workplace," Camille said, not asking, stating it as fact, her voice so calm it was frightening. "A breach of contract, an invasion of my family's private space, and..." She paused, lifted the wineglass on the table and took a slow sip. "I've discovered a diamond ring is missing, the ring I left on the vanity in my bedroom. You were the only one who cleaned that room." Elise stood frozen, the blood drained from her face. "I didn't steal anything. I've never taken a single thing in this house." Her voice shook, but it was clear, and her eyes stayed on Camille's even as her legs threatened to buckle. Camille set the glass down and stepped closer, close enough that Elise caught the familiar Chanel perfume, the scent she'd breathed in every night while cleaning the master bedroom. "I don't care what you say," Camille said softly, each word sharp as a blade. "Get out. Right now. Don't take your things. Don't take your last month's pay. If I see you near this house again, I'll call the police and report theft." Elise wanted to say more, to argue, to scream that she hadn't stolen anything, that the real thief was standing right in front of her in silk and wine. But she looked into Camille's eyes and saw what she'd once seen in Travis's eyes years ago. The absolute coldness of someone who knew she had power and was willing to use it. Elise couldn't win. Not here. Not now. Elise turned away, went down to the basement, and got Penny. The little girl was sitting on a folding chair drawing, and when she looked up and saw her mother, her smile vanished the instant she saw her mother's face. "Mom, why are you crying?" Elise didn't answer. She took her daughter's hand and walked out through the back gate. The guard opened it without looking at her, without saying a word, and slammed the iron gate shut behind them with a hard metallic crash in the late night. Penny walked along the dark sidewalk, gripping her mother's hand, her eyes red but not crying. She looked up and asked, "Mom, will Mr. Beck be okay? Who's going to tell him everything? Who's going to keep him safe?" Elise dropped to her knees and held her child right there on the sidewalk, the night wind cutting cold across both of them. And she said in the most broken voice she'd ever heard come out of her own mouth, "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know." Inside the mansion, Beckett heard the commotion from downstairs echoing into his bedroom. Camille's sharp voice, a door closing, quick footsteps. He called out, "What's going on?" Brenda appeared in the doorway, her tone light as air. "It's nothing, Mr. Hale. The cleaning woman was dismissed for violating the contract. Tomorrow there'll be someone new." "Mr. Hale." Not Mr. Beck. Beckett gripped the edge of the bed and didn't ask anything else. He knew that if he reacted too strongly right now, Camille would learn more than she already knew. He lay back down, closed his eyes, and slid his right hand into the breast pocket of his shirt to hold the pebble wrapped with red thread. Still warm, still there. That night, Beckett lay awake until morning. He listened. He listened to the mansion settling into the late hours, to the clock's steady ticking, to the wind slipping through the crack of a window. He waited for the familiar footsteps on the hallway. Light and even, with a slight drag of the left foot. He waited for the faint lullaby she used to hum while she cleaned. A song with words he couldn't quite make out. A sound he'd grown so used to it had become the house's heartbeat in the deep night. He waited for the soft scratch of pencil on newspaper from the corner of the sofa. There was nothing. No footsteps. No humming. No pencil moving. Only silence. And Beckett Hale, a man who had lived in darkness for 8 months, realized for the first time that silence could hurt far more than darkness ever did. 5 days after she was thrown out of the Hale mansion, Elise learned what it meant to hit rock bottom. On the first day, she went looking for work in 3 places. A Chinese restaurant at the end of the block that needed a night shift dishwasher, a laundromat on the corner of Halsted that needed someone to press clothes, and a small grocery on Ashland that needed someone to stock shelves. All 3 turned her away. 2 because she had no reference letter from her last job, the other because they'd already hired enough people that morning. On the second day, she went farther, taking 2 buses out to Pilsen, knocking on the doors of every restaurant, every coffee shop, every storefront with a hiring sign in the window. No one took her. On the third day, she asked for housekeeping work at a cheap motel near the highway, and the owner looked her up and down and asked if she was willing to do other work too, and Elise turned around and walked out without answering. On the 4th day, she went nowhere because Penny started coughing. On the 5th day, Penny ran a fever. The little girl lay curled on the single bed, a thin blanket pulled to her chin, shivering hard, forehead burning, coughing in dry fits until her face turned red. The room had no heat, and Chicago winter slipped through the window cracks and crawled up from the rotten wooden floor, cold enough to cut down to bone. Elise carried her child and walked 8 blocks to the free clinic on Archer, the only place she knew that didn't require insurance. The waiting room was packed tight, rows of green plastic chairs, the smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat and rain-soaked clothes. Elise waited 4 hours, Penny blazing hot in her lap, the child drifting off and waking and drifting off, each cough making her whole body jerk. The doctor examined her for 3 minutes, wrote a prescription for ordinary cold medicine, and said to rest and drink plenty of warm water. The medicine cost $12. Elise paid with the last of the loose change in her wallet. When they finally made it back to the rented room, a sheet of paper taped to the door was waiting for them. A notice that 2 months of rent were owed, 3 days to pay, and if she didn't, the room would be locked and their belongings put out. Elise pulled the paper down, folded it, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She laid Penny on the bed, pulled the blanket up, mixed the medicine with warm water and helped her drink it, then sat down on the cold floor with her back against the wall and stared at her worn canvas shoes in the corner. Those shoes had walked from Kentucky to Chicago, had scrubbed how many floors, had run how many streets, and now the toes split open, the soles worn so thin that when she stepped onto wet pavement, water seeped straight up to her heel. Elise looked at those shoes and, for the first time since leaving Kentucky, she thought, I can't do this anymore. Not anger, not sadness, just total exhaustion, the kind that comes when you've poured everything into running, into enduring, into standing back up, and you realize there's nothing left to pour. Night fell. Penny coughed in her sleep, sweat dampening her hair, her face flushed in the streetlight spilling through the window. The child shifted, hugging her pillow, and whispered in a light fever dream, Mr. Beck is probably alone too, like me. Elise sat on the floor, back to the wall, holding an empty wallet with not a single coin left inside. She opened it, closed it, opened it again, closed it again, as if the next time it opened, money might appear, and then she thought about the one thing she hated most in the world, Travis. His number was still in her contacts. She'd never deleted it, not because she wanted to keep it, but because she was afraid that if she did, somehow he would know and become angry, that irrational fear lodged in bone that people who've never been abused will never understand. She could call him, say she was wrong, beg him to forgive her, beg to come back. At least in Kentucky there was a roof, a bed, heat. Penny wouldn't have to shiver in a cold room. Elise could endure it. She'd endured it for years. What was a few more years? Her hand held the phone, her finger sliding through the contacts until it stopped on the name Travis Warren, her thumb hovering over the call button. She stared at the screen, the pale blue light washing her face in the dark, and she realized she was shaking from her hand to her shoulder, shaking not from cold, but from disgust with herself, because she was truly considering walking back into hell so her daughter could sleep warm. Penny shifted on the bed, coughed once, and whispered in her fever, "Mr. Beck." Elise closed her eyes, set the phone down on the floor, pressed her face into her knees and bit her lip so she wouldn't cry out loud. Then she looked up at the star drawing Penny had taped to the wall with masking tape, a 5-pointed star uneven against a field of darkness, a star the child had drawn for a blind man because she believed there was always light somewhere. Elise reached for the bed, took Penny's tiny hand, burning hot in her own, and said, her voice breaking, so soft it was almost only for herself, "I won't give up. I promise you. I promise." And at that exact moment, the knock came. 2 knocks, hard and final, in the middle of the night on the 3rd-floor door of a South Side room. Elise jolted up from the floor, her heart skittering out of control. 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody knocked on a 3rd-floor rooming house door on the South Side at 2 o'clock in the morning unless something was wrong. She glanced at Penny, still asleep on the bed, went to the door, and pressed her eye to the peephole. The man in the hallway was so large his shoulders nearly brushed both sides of the frame. A black leather jacket worn at the seams, his head shaved clean, and a long scar running from his right temple down toward the corner of his mouth, pale against dark skin, as if someone had dragged a knife across his face years ago. Elise didn't know him. She shoved the door hard to close it, but a big hand caught the gap, not rough, just firm, steady as concrete. "Wait." His voice was low and hoarse, but not hostile. "Beckett sent me." Elise stood rigid behind the half-closed door, her hand still pushing, her whole body pulled tight. "Beckett Hale," he added, slowing down like he was choosing the exact words that would keep her from slamming it shut. "He said you're his eyes." Elise didn't let go of the door. Anyone could say Beckett's name. Anyone could make up a line like that. She'd lived long enough with liars to know that what mattered wasn't how a sentence sounded, but what sat behind it. "I don't know who you are. Please leave." Her voice shook, but it held. The man was silent for a second, then said, softer now, almost gentle, so strangely mismatched with his massive frame and the scar on his face that it didn't seem real. "He told me to ask you one question. He said if I asked this, you'd know it was true." He paused, drew a breath. "Is Penny doing okay?" Elise's hand slipped off the door. 4 words. "Is Penny doing okay?" No one in this world asked her that except Mrs. Mabel. Not co-workers, not neighbors, not a single person in 7 months in Chicago. And now, in the dead of night, a stranger stood at the door of her shabby room and asked about her daughter's well-being, in the voice of someone who truly wanted the answer. Elise broke down crying, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but because that question told her Beckett Hale, the blind boss sitting alone in his mansion, had thought of Penny. With everything happening to him, he'd thought of the 5-year-old who'd given him a pebble wrapped in red thread. She opened the door. The man stepped inside, looked around the cramped room, his gaze sliding over the damp, stained wall, the narrow bed where Penny lay coughing in her sleep, the cold wooden floor, the crumpled eviction notice on the table. He didn't look pitying. He only nodded, as if confirming something he'd already expected. "I'm Sullivan Voss. People call me Sully. I was Beckett's bodyguard for 12 years, until Garrett threw me out 8 months ago, right after Beckett lost his sight." He sat down on the only plastic chair in the room, the chair creaking under his weight. "Beckett called me. 3 in the morning, 5 days ago. 5 days ago. Right after the night Elise had been fired." Sully told it in a low voice, clipped and direct, like a man used to reporting facts. Beckett stayed awake for 5 straight nights after Elise disappeared. Every night he listened to the mansion's silence and knew she wasn't there anymore. He didn't ask Brenda, didn't ask Camille, because asking would mean admitting the cleaning woman mattered to him. Instead, he waited until the second night, when the whole house was asleep, then got out of bed and felt his way through the dark to his study, to the bookshelf. He used both hands to touch each book on the shelf, one by one, opened them, turned pages, searching for the small slip of paper he'd hidden inside one of them months earlier, the slip with Sully's phone number, torn from an old address book before he went completely blind, back when he still had enough light to write. 2 hours groping through darkness. 2 hours of fingertips skimming hundreds of pages, trying to tell a small piece of paper from 1,000 sheets, and then he found it. The slip was tucked between page 172 of the book he'd read more than any other. He held it, went to the desk, lifted the landline, and dialed by counting each button. Garrett hadn't thought to cut the landline, because he assumed Beckett had no one left to call, the biggest mistake Garrett had ever made. At 3 a.m, Sully's phone rang. Beckett's voice came through, cold, clear, wide awake. "Sully, I need you. They're killing me." Sully didn't ask who. He didn't ask how. He only said, "I'm coming." Then Beckett added, his voice shifting, softer, almost pleading, "Find her for me. Elise Warren, the cleaning woman. She was fired. She's got a little girl named Penny, 5 years old. They live somewhere on the south side. Ask the mansion's human resources department. Her employee file will have the address." Sully found Elise in 2 days. The Hale Mansion's personnel file, managed by an outside service company, had her rooming house address, her phone number, copies of her documents. For the former bodyguard of Chicago's boss, finding a cleaning woman on the south side wasn't any harder than finding his way home. But Sully didn't come right away. He spent 3 days checking, verifying, reaching out to Phil, Beckett's old driver, who still worked at the mansion because Garrett kept him, needing someone who knew the roads. Phil was still loyal to Beckett. Phil confirmed everything. Garrett had moved $3 million out of Beckett's personal account through a shell company under someone else's name. Camille had signed a forged power of attorney in Beckett's place for 2 real estate transactions. And most important, Garrett was preparing a major meeting 10 days from now, summoning the district bosses, lawyers, the upper ranks, for one purpose only, to bring Beckett in to sign papers, transferring all power to Garrett. Beckett had to be there to sign voluntarily in front of everyone, because without his signature, the takeover would face pushback from those who were still loyal. Garrett needed Beckett obedient, broken, out of his mind enough to sign whatever was put in front of him. Sully finished, then looked at Elise. 10 days. We've got 10 days. Elise sat on the floor with her back against the wall, tears dried on her cheeks, watching Penny cough in her sleep, looking at the eviction notice on the table, looking at her empty wallet, then lifting her eyes to the huge man sitting on the cheap plastic chair in the middle of her miserable room. 30 minutes ago, she'd almost called Travis. 30 minutes ago, she'd almost gone back to hell. Then the knock came, and instead of hell, Beckett Hale sent her a scarred man who asked if her daughter was doing okay. 10 days, Elise said, her voice raw from crying, from fever, from sheer exhaustion. But inside those dark, circled eyes, for the first time in 5 days, something lit up. Not hope, not yet, just refusal to let go. Tell me what I have to do. The next morning, Sully came to pick up the 2 of them in an old pickup truck parked in the back alley. Not because he was being careful, but because he hadn't had any other vehicle since Garrett kicked him out of the organization 8 months earlier. Penny sat in her mother's lap in the back seat, still coughing but running less of a fever after a night of medicine. Her eyes looking through the gray window glass at a city waking up under November fog. Sully drove through the loop, turned onto a narrow street behind Michigan Avenue, and stopped in front of an old 4-story office building with a brown brick facade and a small sign by the door that read, Joanna Pratt, Attorney at Law. The office was on the 3rd floor. One single room, a wooden desk piled with files, 2 worn leather guest chairs, and a window looking out over the gray rooftops of downtown Chicago. Joanna Pratt was 50 years old, her silver hair cut short, black framed glasses, no makeup, eyes so sharp, Elise felt as if the woman could see straight through her the second she stepped inside. Sully gave a brief introduction. Joanna nodded, pointed Elise toward a chair, poured water for both of them, then set Penny in the corner of the room with a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. The little girl sat on the floor and began to draw, silent. Joanna looked at Sully. Tell me. Sully told her everything. Joanna listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook, her eyes never leaving Sully. But when he mentioned Camille signing a forged power of attorney, her pen paused and pressed hard enough into the paper to leave an indent. When Sully finished, Joanna turned to Elise. You're the only witness outside the organization. What did you hear? What did you see? Elise told it from the beginning. 2 months cleaning, Brenda bringing the medicine every night at 11, Camille controlling everything Beckett ate and drank, Garrett gradually replacing Beckett in every decision, Penny overhearing Camille talk about medicine and accident, Penny seeing Brenda take an unlabeled bottle from a private locked cabinet. Joanna wrote, nodded, then set the pen down, took off her glasses, and looked straight at Elise, with eyes that no longer had a lens between them. I'm going to tell you the situation as it really is, she said, her voice neither gentle nor harsh, only direct. Camille is preparing paperwork to certify Beckett as legally incapacitated. She already has a private doctor willing to sign. If that packet is presented at the meeting 10 days from now, combined with the transfer papers Garrett needs Beckett to sign, then everything is over. Beckett loses everything, legally, and it can't be reversed. Joanna put her glasses back on, opened a folder Sully had brought, and flipped through the financial documents Phil had secretly copied. But they made a mistake. Garrett needs Beckett in the meeting to sign in front of everyone. That's the weakness, because if Beckett is present, Beckett can also speak, and if Beckett speaks, he can present evidence. Joanna laid out the plan, step by step, clear and cold, like someone who'd played chess long enough to know the other side always believes it's winning. Step 1. Beckett acts weaker, more broken, so Camille and Garrett get careless, believing he's ready to sign anything put in front of him. Step 2. Sully gathers financial evidence. Phil keeps feeding inside information, documenting every transaction Garrett makes using Beckett's money. Step 3. Elise provides sworn witness testimony, detailing every night she observed, every time Brenda delivered the medicine, every phone call Camille made. Step 4. Joanna prepares the legal filings, the lawsuit, the asset freeze request, putting everything into one single package. Step 5. They trigger it at the very meeting meant to strip Beckett of power, when Garrett summons Beckett to sign, when every regional boss and senior figure is present, when Camille plays the grieving wife. That is when Beckett stands up, presents the evidence, and Elise walks in to testify. Joanna looked at Elise and put her pen down. Do you understand what this means? You will have to face Camille and Garrett directly. In front of men the whole city of Chicago doesn't dare look in the eye. This is not a courtroom with a judge and laws. This is a boardroom of the underworld. Do you understand the risk? Elise opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, Penny's voice came from the corner of the room. The child had stopped drawing without anyone noticing, sitting on the floor hugging her knees, big eyes fixed on Joanna, and she asked in a clear, worried voice, "Lawyer lady, is Mr. Beck going to prison?" The whole room went still. Sully stared down at his shoes. Joanna looked at the 5-year-old sitting on the office floor. Hair messy, coat too big, eyes red from coughing all night. And she saw something hundreds of cases had never shown her, pure worry without calculation. "No, sweetheart," Joanna said, her voice softening for the first time since the meeting began. "We're doing everything we can to keep him free." Penny nodded, solemn, then said quietly, "Good, because I promised him. I said I would help him. I don't lie." Elise looked at her daughter on that cold floor. 5 years old, sick, thin, hair tangled, speaking about a promise to a blind mafia boss with a certainty most adults never have. Then she turned back to Joanna, to Sully, and she said, her voice not trembling now, not breaking, only quiet and clear, like someone who had finally put her feet on the ground after falling for a long time. "My whole life, I've been running. Running from Travis, running from Kentucky, running from the Hale mansion. This time, I'm staying." Joanna studied her, nodded slowly, then put her glasses back on and flipped her notebook to a clean page. "Good. Then we begin." Beckett Hale once ran an underground empire on his ability to read people and play a part. Now he used that same ability to survive. The moment Sully made contact and confirmed the plan was in motion, Beckett began to act. Not to act strong, not to act clear-headed, but to act in the opposite direction. Weaker, more shattered, more unhinged. In the morning, when Camille brought him water, Beckett held the glass with both hands trembling, let it slip onto the carpet, and sent water splashing onto her feet. Camille frowned but didn't suspect anything, only called for Brenda to clean it up. At noon, Garrett stopped by to talk about an upcoming meeting, and Beckett asked 3 times, "What meeting?" like a man who couldn't hold on to a sentence he'd heard 10 seconds ago. Garrett looked at Camille, and the two of them traded a satisfied glance that Beckett didn't need to see to know was happening. In the evening, Beckett called Camille by his mother's name. Margaret, close the window for me. And when Camille corrected him, I'm Camille. Sweetheart. He turned his cloudy eyes toward her with a look of perfectly manufactured confusion, so flawless that if he hadn't been blind, he would have deserved a film award. Camille called Garrett that night, her voice light with relief on the phone in a way she thought no one could hear. Faster than expected. In 10 days, he'll sign anything you put in front of him. Beckett sat in the bedroom, his head angled toward the thin wall that separated his room from the hallway where Camille was speaking, and he heard every word clearly. Each word was a knife, but he didn't bleed on the outside. He bled on the inside. Sully had hidden a recording device inside the cushion of the leather chair in the study, the place where Camille and Garrett often sat and talked when they believed Beckett was taking his afternoon nap. The device was no bigger than a fingertip, its battery good for 7 days, and Phil secretly pulled it out every 3 days so Sully could swap the battery and copy the data. In the first 5 days, it captured 17 conversations between Camille and Garrett, 3 calls Camille made to her private attorney, and 2 exchanges between Brenda and Camille about dosage and schedule. Every night Sully listened back, took notes, and sent everything to Joanna. The board was being flipped piece by piece, and Camille had no idea. But there were nights when Beckett didn't act, and only endured. On the 6th night, Camille came into the bedroom later than usual, her Chanel perfume heavier, her voice softer, as if she wanted something. She sat beside Beckett on the bed, placed her hand on his chest, and slowly threaded her fingers through his hair. "Do you remember when we first fell in love?" Camille whispered, her voice so sweet that if Beckett hadn't known the truth, he would have melted in it the way he had years ago. "You said you'd protect me from everything. You said I was your world. Do you remember?" Beckett swallowed hard. He remembered. He remembered it too well. He remembered the first night he met Camille at a charity gala, her red dress, her bright laugh, and the first time she took his hand, he thought she was the one woman in the world who made him want to be better. He remembered their wedding night, when he promised in front of everyone, "I will protect you from everything." And he had kept that promise. For years he had kept it. But who protected him from her? Camille bent down and kissed his forehead, her lips soft, cold, light as a butterfly settling. "I still love you," she whispered against his skin. Beckett lifted his hand and closed his fingers around Camille's hand, where it rested on his chest. A soft hand, long slender fingers, skin smooth from expensive lotion, nails painted perfectly, cold. He held that hand and thought of another, Elise's hand, roughened by bleach, short fingers, skin cracked from winter, nails cut close because there was no money for polish, warm, the hand that had trembled when it knocked on his door at 2 a.m. to tell the truth even though she was terrified. The hand that had gathered every pill he'd spat out and hidden them in a shoebox under the bed in a damp rooming house. 2 hands. One soft, beautiful, and killing him a little more each day. One calloused, worn, and saving him a little more each night. Camille stroked his hair one more time, then stood, kissed his cheek, whispered, "Sleep well, sweetheart," and walked out. The click of her heels faded down the hallway, steady as a countdown clock that Camille didn't know was counting toward her. When the sound was fully gone, and Camille's bedroom door shut at the end of the corridor, Beckett lay still for 5 more minutes, making sure no one came back. Then he slowly sat up, reached to the nightstand, opened the drawer, and took out the small recorder Sully had given him separately, different from the device hidden in the chair cushion. This one he kept on his person, for the moments he needed to speak, not to record other people's words but to record his own. He pressed the button, heard the soft click, and said, his voice low, clear, fully awake, without a trace of tremor, "This is Beckett Hale. Today is the 6th day. I am not losing my mind. I am being systematically poisoned by my wife, Camille Hale, and my brother, Garrett Hale, through my private nurse, Brenda Cole. I have evidence. Collected pills, recordings of conversations, financial documents proving embezzlement. If anything happens to me before the meeting..." He paused, swallowed, then continued in a voice that for the first time on the recording carried something beyond the coldness of a Chicago boss. "Find Elise Warren. She knows everything. She is my eyes. Protect her and her daughter, Penny, at any cost." He turned the recorder off, put it back in the drawer. Then he slid his hand into the breast pocket of his shirt, where Penny's pebble wrapped in red thread still lay warm, as if it had kept the heat of the tiny hand that had given it to him that night on the stairs. He closed his fist around it, held it tight in his palm, shut the eyes that saw nothing, and spoke to the darkness in a voice only he could hear. 4 more days. Travis Warren never accepted losing anything that belonged to him. Not because he loved Elise, because he had never loved her the way a man is supposed to love. He only saw her as property, and property isn't allowed to leave on its own. 7 months after the night Elise disappeared from that Kentucky house, Travis went looking. He questioned neighbors, questioned Elise's old friends, questioned her cousin in Louisville, and nobody knew, or nobody talked. Then he found it. An old Facebook message Elise had sent to her high school friend 3 months earlier, saying she was in Chicago, she was okay, don't worry. The friend left her phone on the bar counter. Travis sat next to her, and he saw it. That was all it took. Chicago. He took a bus there, 2 days on the road, drunk the whole way. He didn't know the exact address, but he knew Elise was poor. He knew she would be in the cheapest part of town, and he was patient in the way only an obsessed man can be patient. He walked through the South Side neighborhood by neighborhood, asked at every corner store, every cheap restaurant, until a laundromat owner on Halstead remembered a skinny blonde girl with a little daughter who came to wash clothes on Saturday afternoons. The woman pointed the way. Travis found the 3rd-floor room off that familiar South Side alley on the afternoon of the 8th day, 3 days before the power stripping meeting, while Elise was at Joanna's office finishing her sworn statement. Penny was with Miss Mabel in Miss Mabel's room, 2 doors down from Elise's. The pounding started on Elise's door, hard and relentless, and then the familiar cursing Miss Mabel could hear through the thin wall. Miss Mabel told Penny to stay inside, locked the door, then opened her own and looked out. A man stood at Elise's door, tall and thin, hair wild, eyes bloodshot, a wrinkled shirt reeking of cheap bourbon. He turned when he saw Miss Mabel and staggered closer, voice slurred. "You know Elise Warren. She's here. I know she's here." Miss Mabel looked him over with the eyes of 70 years of seeing every kind of man a woman can see, and she knew immediately. This was the kind of man Elise had run from. "I don't know anyone named Elise," she said, flat as stone. "You've got the wrong floor." Travis kicked the wall, cursed, threatened he'd be back, threatened he'd break the door down, threatened he'd find her no matter what. Then he stumbled down the stairs, heavy shoes striking each step. Miss Mabel shut her door, locked it, and picked up the phone to call the number Elise had given her the week before, the number Elise had said to use if anything happened. "The man's name is Sully." Sully answered after 2 rings. Miss Mabel told him quickly. A drunk man came looking for Elise, cursing, banging on the door, just like the violent ex-husband Elise had described. Sully didn't ask a single follow-up question. He said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep Penny in your room." Sully arrived in 18 minutes. Travis was sitting on the 1st-floor steps, smoking, a half-empty bottle wedged between his knees, waiting for Elise to come home. He looked up and saw a man enter the alley, 1.5 times his size, shoulders wide enough to block the passage, a long scar cutting across a face made ghost pale under the streetlight. Sully stopped in front of Travis. He didn't sit. He just stood there, looking down, and he spoke in a voice that wasn't loud and wasn't soft, calm in a way that was more frightening than any shouting. "You're Travis Warren." Not a question. Travis frowned, tightening his grip on the bottle. "Who's asking?" "Nobody's asking," Sully said. "I'm telling you, Elise Warren is under Beckett Hale's protection. Do you know that name?" Travis did know it. Even in Kentucky, even drunk most days, Beckett Hale wasn't a name you had to live in Chicago to hear. It was the name that showed up in crime reports, in barroom whispers, in the way people shook their heads when someone asked who controlled the South. The color drained from Travis's face. The bottle lowered in his hand. Her, the kid, the old woman. Sully went on, counting on his fingers, slow. All of them are under Mr. Hale's protection. You have exactly 24 hours to leave Chicago. After that, Sully tilted his head, a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't promise anything." Travis got to his feet and backed up 2 steps, the bottle slipping from his hand and clinking on the stair. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked fast out of the alley, shoulders hunched, head down, the walk of a man who had just realized he'd stepped onto the wrong field. Travis Warren disappeared into the Chicago night and never came back. When Elise returned to the rented room at 9 o'clock that night, Miss Mabel told her, Sully stood in the hallway, back against the wall, arms folded, waiting. Elise listened, then stood there in the hallway, with her hand braced against the wall, trembling all over. Not trembling from fear of Travis, but trembling from the realization that he had been here. He had stood 2 doors away from Penny. He had been that close. Sully looked at her and spoke quietly, his voice low. Beckett told me one thing when he called at 3 o'clock this morning. He said, he's never going to touch her again, no matter what it costs. He kept his word. Elise leaned her back to the hallway wall and closed her eyes. Tears ran, and she didn't wipe them away. She thought of Beckett sitting in darkness in that mansion, blind, surrounded by people who wanted him dead. And yet in the middle of all his own danger and planning, he still thought of her, still gave the order to protect her, still remembered the name of the man who had hit her, even though she had never told him the story. He knew because he listened, because he fitted the pieces together, because he understood. For the first time since leaving Kentucky, since running, since living in a rented room and locking the door every night and flinching at every sound, Elise felt safe. Not because of a lock, not because of Miss Mabel, not because Sully stood in the hallway, but because someone, a man who couldn't see her face, had chosen to protect her. Not because she belonged to him, not because she owed him, but because he wanted to. Penny opened Miss Mabel's door and ran out to wrap her arms around her mother's legs. "Mom, a strange man came this afternoon. Miss Mabel told me to sit still. I was really good." Elise gathered her up, kissed her hair, and whispered, "You were so good. I'm here now. Nobody can hurt us anymore." On the last night before the meeting, Sully brought Elise into the mansion through the back gate by the west garden, a route only people who'd worked for Beckett for years would know, a place where the security camera had been removed by Garrett 3 months earlier for being unnecessary, but in truth because he didn't want anyone recording the late-night visits from his private attorney and the fake doctor. Phil unlocked the gate, gave Sully a nod, said nothing, swept his eyes once over the corridor, then vanished into the shadows. Penny dozed on her mother's shoulder, her head resting against Elise's neck, her breathing light and even, one arm wrapped tight around the teddy bear with the chipped nose that had followed her from Kentucky. Elise stepped into the study, laid Penny down on the familiar sofa, and draped her coat over the child. Penny shifted, mumbled, then curled up and went right back to sleep. The oak door closed. The room was dark, no lamps. Beckett sat in the leather chair, not needing light because he'd never needed it. And tonight, Elise didn't need it either. She sat in the chair across from him, listening to his breathing, listening to Penny's steady breaths on the sofa, listening to the clock ticking on the wall. They sat in the darkness for a long time without speaking, as if the silence tonight wasn't an emptiness to fill, but a space they'd learned to share through so many nights before. Beckett spoke first, his voice low, slow. "Tomorrow everything could collapse. If Garrett has a card I didn't anticipate, if the district bosses don't stand with me, if Joanna can't submit the evidence before Garrett controls the meeting room, then it's over. Not just for me." He paused. "For you and Penny too. You stepped forward as a witness. They'll know your face." Silence. Then he went on, his voice changing. No longer the boss dissecting a situation, but a man worried about someone. "Take Penny somewhere safe. Sully will bring you both to a place Joanna is holding. If tomorrow doesn't go the way we planned, Joanna will get you out of Chicago. I've already arranged it." Elise sat in the dark, facing the sound of his voice though she couldn't see him, and she thought about 7 months ago, when she'd carried Penny onto a Greyhound and fled Kentucky, about 2 months ago, when she'd walked into this mansion as an invisible cleaning woman, about the night she'd knocked on his door at 2 a.m. because she couldn't stand the silence inside herself anymore. She'd spent her life running from Travis, running from Kentucky, running from this mansion when Camille threw her out, and every time she ran, she lost something, a piece of herself left behind. "Last time I ran because I was scared," Elise said, her voice soft but steady. "This time I'm staying, because I choose to." The silence stretched between them, Penny's even breathing on the sofa, the night wind slipping through the crack of a window. Then Beckett did something he'd never done. He reached across the dark space between the 2 chairs, slow, cautious, like someone reaching into darkness for something he wasn't sure would be there. His fingertips touched Elise's cheek. She didn't pull away. He let his fingers move lightly over her skin, unhurried, careful. The way a blind man feels the world. The way he'd read the raised marks on Penny's drawing. Except this time he was reading the face of the woman who had saved him. His fingers traced her cheekbone, the bridge of her nose, her forehead, then stopped. At her right temple, a small indentation in the skin, less than an inch long, slightly raised. Scar tissue healed but never gone. The scar Elise always hid with her hair, always turned away when someone looked too long. The scar no one in Chicago had ever asked about, because no one had ever looked at her closely enough to see. But Beckett didn't need sight. He could feel it. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low, gentle. But under that gentleness was something hard and heavy, like heated steel. Elise swallowed, closed her eyes even though the room was already dark, and answered with a calm so flat it said everything. "Someone who used to say he loved me." Beckett's fingers stayed on the scar for one more second, as if he were engraving it into memory through touch, the place where he stored everything important since he lost his sight. Then he withdrew his hand, set it on the arm of the chair, and said in a voice heavy as stone, each word deliberate, unhurried, unshakable, "He won't be able to touch you again, and he never will." Elise opened her eyes. She understood. Sully had told her, but she hadn't asked for details. She only knew Travis had come and Travis had gone, and between those two events was Beckett Hale's arm reaching out from the dark to protect her even though he couldn't see her. She didn't say thank you. Thank you was too small for what he'd done. Instead, she reached out, took his hand from the arm of the chair, and placed it in her palm. His hand was large, warm, calloused at the knuckles from years of holding guns and signing contracts. The hand that had once made an entire city afraid. Hers was small, rough, cracked from bleach and Chicago winter. A hand that had never held anything but a broom and her daughter's fingers. Two hands held together in the darkness, not squeezing tight, not letting go, just holding, just there. And Elise said nothing, because she didn't need to. She let him feel the only thing she could give him. She was here. She was real. She wasn't leaving. On the sofa, Penny shifted. The teddy bear slid to the floor, and in her sleep the child whispered in a sweet, drowsy voice, "Mr. Beck." The two adults sat in the dark, their hands still joined, and at the same time they both gave a small laugh. A smile no one could see. A smile that didn't need to be seen. The first smile in this mansion that didn't need light to exist. Outside the window, the eastern sky began to move from black to deep gray. Dawn was coming, and in a few hours, everything would begin. The large meeting room on the second floor of the Hale mansion, the room Beckett once used to receive the regional bosses and make decisions that could shake all of Chicago, had been rearranged by Garrett for this occasion. A long oak table sat in the center, 14 black leather chairs, each chair meant for someone with real power inside the organization. 7 regional bosses sat along both sides, middle-aged men in dark suits, faces cold, eyes sharp, men who had watched blood spill and money change hands enough times that nothing showed on them anymore. Garrett's 2 attorneys sat at the right head of the table, briefcases already open, papers stacked in clean, precise piles. Camille sat beside Garrett at the main head position, an elegant black dress, hair pinned neatly up, eyes just red enough to look like a wife grieving a husband's decline, but not so red she lost control. She played the role perfectly. Garrett stood, adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, ready to speak. Then the meeting room doors opened. Beckett Hale walked in, Brenda holding his hand to guide him. He moved slowly, painfully slow, cane tapping a steady rhythm on the wood floor, each step looking like it cost him everything. Head slightly bowed, shoulders slumped, the posture of a man who had surrendered. At the threshold he stumbled, the cane slid, his body tipped, and Brenda caught him. The regional bosses glanced at one another, one man giving a small shake of his head, another looking away. The North Side boss, an old silver-haired man named Morrison, let out a faint sigh. This was no longer the Beckett Hale they used to fear. This was his shadow. At least, that was what everyone in the room believed. Beckett was guided to the chair at the head of the table opposite Garrett. He sat down heavily, both hands placed on the tabletop, clouded eyes staring straight into empty space. Garrett looked at his brother and smiled the kind of smile he saved for men about to lose. Then he stood. "Thank you all for coming," Garrett began, confident and loud, the voice of someone who believed he'd already won. "As you all know, Beckett's health has declined severely over the last 8 months. As his brother, and his only remaining family, I propose. Enough. 2 words. Not shouted, not raised. But the entire room went dead silent, as if the air had been sucked out. Because that voice wasn't the voice of the man who had just stumbled at the door. It wasn't the voice of a man trembling and forgetting names and days. This was Beckett Hale's voice, his real voice, cold, carrying, full of authority. The voice Chicago had once heard and feared. The voice the 14 men in this room believed had died along with his sight. Beckett straightened his back, shoulders opening, chin lifting, the collapse falling away from him as fast as a mask being stripped off. He couldn't see anyone, but he turned his face toward Garrett with the precision of a man who knew exactly where his enemy sat. 8 months, Beckett said, slow and clear, each word dropping onto the oak table like a bullet landing in a metal tray. 8 months I sat in darkness. 8 months I swallowed the pills my wife and my brother handed me, believing they were medicine. 8 months I thought I was only an unlucky man who'd lost his light. He paused, letting the silence press down on everyone in the room. I was wrong. I didn't lose my light. They took it. Garrett stood frozen, the smile dead on his lips. Camille gripped her chair arm, knuckles bleaching white. Beckett nodded behind him. Phil entered through the side door holding a small Bluetooth speaker and set it in the center of the table. Sully had copied the recordings onto Phil's phone the night before. Phil pressed play. Camille's voice filled the meeting room. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. The medicine is working. His eyes aren't recovering. Brenda says, 2 more months and nothing can be reversed. Then he'll sign anything. Then Garrett's voice. Good. Make sure Brenda stays on schedule. The room felt like it had been drained of oxygen. Morrison, the North Side boss, shot up from his chair, face turning a dark, furious red. 2 other regional bosses stared at Garrett with the look that, in the underworld, meant a death sentence. Camille sprang to her feet, her chair tipping backward, her voice slicing. Delusion. Fabricated evidence. He's incompetent. Everyone can see he's incompetent. She turned to the bosses, her gaze cutting from man to man, searching for an ally, but no one looked at her. They were looking at Beckett, and Beckett didn't need to answer Camille. He only nodded toward the main doors. They opened. Joanna Pratt stepped in. Gray suit, black framed glasses, briefcase in hand, face unreadable, and right behind her came Elise Warren. Elise wore the white button-down Sully had bought her this morning, because she owned nothing but old t-shirts, hair tied back neatly, face pale but spine straight, eyes forward. She walked into a room full of the most powerful men in Chicago, and she didn't lower her head. Her voice shook, but it was clear, each word separate. My name is Elise Warren. I scrubbed the floors of this house every night for 2 months. I heard Camille Hale say second accident at 11 at night in the kitchen. I saw Nurse Brenda Cole take an unlabeled bottle from a private locked cabinet in her room, and my daughter, 5 years old, heard Mrs. Hale and Mr. Garrett talking about medicine, eyes, and accident in the living room. Camille went pale. Then her eyes flicked toward the doorway and she went rigid. Penny stood at the threshold, clutching a teddy bear with a chipped nose, big eyes staring into the room. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She only stood there, small and thin and messy-haired, framed by the doorway of the underworld's boardroom, and looked straight at Camille. Camille understood. In that moment, she understood more clearly than she ever had in her life. The 5-year-old she had never bothered to look at. The cleaning woman's daughter she treated like air. The child she believed was invisible, had destroyed everything. Beckett turned toward his wife's voice, cloudy eyes seeing nothing, yet aimed straight at her with terrifying precision. You said you loved me, he said. Not angry, not shouting, only heavy and sad and bone-tired. You kissed my forehead every night and told me good night. You stroked my hair and asked if I remembered when we first fell in love. But love doesn't poison. Camille, love doesn't bury the person beside you alive and then kiss their forehead before turning out the light. Camille opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time since Elise had known her, Camille had nothing to say. The side door opened again. Sully came in with Phil, and 3 old guards Sully had reconnected with over the past week, men Garrett had pushed out, but who remained loyal to Beckett. Joanna set a thick stack of documents on the table. Financial records proving Garrett had stolen $3 million, the forged power of attorney with Beckett's signature, and the court-ordered asset freeze Joanna had secured the day before. Morrison stood, looked around the table, looked at each regional boss, then looked toward Beckett. The old man nodded slowly, heavily, and said in a rough voice, "I stand with Beckett." One by one around the table, they nodded. No one stood with Garrett. Not a single man. Everything ended faster than Beckett had expected. When Morrison gave a single nod, and each district boss rose, one after another, to stand with him, Garrett looked around the meeting room like a man who'd just woken from a dream and realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. No one looked at him. No one spoke to him. 14 men in that room turned their backs on Garrett Hale in silence, and in the underworld, that silence weighed more than any sentence. Sully stepped forward and stopped beside Garrett, not touching him, but his presence was enough. Garrett understood. He placed a hand on the oak table, stood up slowly, buttoned his suit jacket out of habit, like a man who'd lost everything but still tried to keep his posture, then faced Beckett one last time. "You'll regret this," Garrett said, his voice hoarse but still hard, still arrogant to the very end. Beckett turned his head toward his brother, his cloudy eyes seeing nothing, but his voice so clear it made Garrett take half a step back. "You're the one who'll regret it. You have for a long time. You just don't know it yet." Garrett walked out of the meeting room, Sully and 2 former guards following. There was no shouting, no struggle, no violence. Only the footsteps of a man who'd once believed he would rule Chicago, leaving a house he would never set foot in again. That afternoon, Camille packed a suitcase in the master bedroom. Beckett stood in the doorway with his cane, his back against the frame, listening to the zipper being pulled, to clothes folded and placed inside, to a perfume bottle set down on the vanity for the last time. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't panicked. She didn't cry. Camille folded each dress and set each pair of shoes into the suitcase, as if she were preparing for an ordinary trip, not walking out of the life of the man she'd been poisoning for 8 months. When she rolled the suitcase across the room, the wheels murmuring over the wood floor, she stopped 2 steps from Beckett. She didn't turn to look at him, even though he couldn't see. She only stopped, spine straight, head tilted slightly to one side, and asked in a strangely calm voice, "Did you ever truly love me?" Beckett was silent, for a long time. Then he answered, not angry, not cold, only tired, and so honest that each word seemed to seep blood. "I did. And that's why this hurts so much." Camille didn't say anything else. She pulled the suitcase past him into the hallway, went down the staircase to the first floor, across the living room, through the grand foyer, to the front door. Her heels kept an even rhythm on the marble, each step echoing in the empty mansion, a rhythm Beckett had heard thousands of times through years of marriage, a rhythm he'd once loved because it meant she was coming closer to him, a rhythm he now heard moving farther and farther away. Not fast, not slow. Steady. The front door opened, the late afternoon wind slipped in, and then it closed. The heels stopped. Beckett stood alone in the second-floor hallway, his hand wrapped around the cane, and he listened as the last sound dissolved into air. He would remember those heels forever, but this time, when the silence returned, he didn't feel hollow. He felt light like a man who had just set down something unbearably heavy, something he'd carried on his shoulders for too long without realizing he was allowed to put it down. Sully came back before nightfall and gave his report in clipped sentences. Brenda Cole had been arrested in her quarters, her locked cabinet forced open, 6 unlabeled vials confiscated, and she hadn't resisted, only sat on the bed staring at the floor. The private doctor Camille had hired had been reported by Joanna, and the investigation order was already being processed. The poisoning system was shattered, and with Sully's men watching the borders, Garrett and Camille were forced into an exile they could never return from. That night, Beckett sat in his study. The mansion was empty. No Camille heels in the hallway, no Brenda knocking with medication, no Garrett talking on the phone in the living room. Only silence. And for the first time in 8 months, silence wasn't frightening anymore. 3 days after the meeting, Sully drove Beckett to an eye clinic on Michigan Avenue. Not the doctor Camille had hired, not the hospital Garrett had chosen, but an independent physician Joanna had recommended, an optic nerve specialist named Daniel Keene, a man who had turned down more bribes than patients he'd ever treated. Beckett sat in the exam room, while Dr. Keene shined lights into his eyes, ran reflex tests, photographed the optic nerve, measured nerve damage. Through it all, Beckett stayed still, back straight, face blank, as if he were sitting in a boardroom and not waiting for someone to decide whether he would ever see light again. Dr. Keene returned after 40 minutes, sat across from him, and spoke plainly, without decoration, the kind of talk Beckett respected. The toxin Brenda had been putting into his daily medication for 8 months was a compound that damaged the optic nerve. Low dose, but cumulative. Designed to cause gradual blindness, without leaving an obvious signature in standard blood tests. If Beckett had kept taking it for 2 more months the way Camille planned, the damage would have been irreversible. But he had stopped 3 weeks earlier, because he'd been slipping the pill under his tongue each night, because Elise had been collecting them, because a 5-year-old child had noticed an unlabeled bottle in a locked cabinet. Those 3 weeks saved him. The optic nerve was recovering. Slowly, but it was recovering. Dr. Keene recommended surgery, microsurgical intervention to relieve pressure on the nerve, combined with rehabilitation therapy. Success rate, 60 to 70% vision recovery. Failure rate, worse damage, permanent blindness, no second surgery possible. Beckett listened, nodded, thanked the doctor, then sat silent in the truck all the way back, not speaking once. Sully watched him in the rearview mirror and didn't ask. He knew Beckett was thinking, and when Beckett Hale was thinking, the whole world was supposed to stay quiet and wait. That evening, Elise came to the mansion, not sneaking through the back gate anymore. She walked in through the front with Penny holding her hand, and the new guard Sully had placed there opened the door for her. She found Beckett in the study, sitting in the leather chair, the little pebble wrapped in red thread turning slowly between his fingers. Penny ran in, climbed onto the sofa, and started drawing. Elise sat in the familiar chair across from him. "The doctor says there's surgery," Beckett said after a long time, and his voice wasn't the boss's voice making a decision. It was the voice of a man who was afraid. Elise had never heard him speak like this. 60 to 70%. It sounds high. He paused. But the other 30% means permanent blindness. No going back. He rolled the pebble, the red thread winding around his finger. "For 8 months, I lived in darkness. I learned how to live in it. I found you and Penny inside that darkness. If the surgery fails, I lose hope altogether. Darkness with hope, I can handle. Darkness without hope." He swallowed hard. "I'm not sure." Elise looked at him, the man who once controlled the city with a whisper, sitting in front of her admitting he was scared. Not scared of Garrett, not scared of Camille, not scared of enemies or bullets or knives, scared of opening his eyes and still seeing nothing but dark. She reached out and took the hand holding the pebble, closed her fingers around his, tight, warm, steady, the way he had held her wrist the night Brenda listened at the door, the way Penny had held his fingers on the stairs. "Then you still have us," Elise said, her voice gentle but steady, each word set down like a brick laid into a wall. "Dark or light, we're not going anywhere. Do you hear me? We're not going anywhere." Beckett held her hand, held the pebble, held both at once, and he didn't speak. He only nodded. 2 weeks later, Beckett lay on the operating table at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the white surgical lights blazing down on eyes that could not see them. Out in the hallway, Elise sat in a plastic chair, back straight, hands clasped together, staring at the operating room door without blinking. Penny sat beside her, feet swinging above the floor, and on her lap was the new drawing she'd made that morning. 3 people standing in front of a house, the tallest man in the middle, the woman on the left holding his hand, the child on the right holding his other hand, and above them, a big round sun throwing rays down on all 3. In the lower corner, crooked pencil letters. Family. 4 hours of surgery. Elise didn't stand up once. Penny drew 2 more pictures, fell asleep against her mother's shoulder, woke up, asked, "Is it done yet, Mom?" and fell asleep again. When Dr. Keene stepped out, pulled down his mask, and nodded, Elise couldn't breathe for 3 seconds. 2 days later, the hospital room. Beckett sat up in bed, white bandages wrapped around his eyes. Dr. Keene stood at his side, Elise on the other side, Penny sitting in a chair by the bed with the family drawing in her lap, waiting. Dr. Keene slowly removed the bandages. Wrap 1, wrap 2, wrap 3, the last layer of gauze. "Open your eyes slowly," the doctor said. "Easy." Beckett opened his eyes. Blinked. Blurry. White. Then, smudged shapes. Outlines rising out of fog. Edges first, then color. Slowly. As if the world were being redrawn, stroke by stroke in front of him. And the first person Beckett Hale saw after 9 months of darkness was Penny. The little girl stood up on the chair, lifted the drawing to her face level, grinning wide, a missing tooth, hair messy, eyes bright. and the picture of 3 people holding hands under a shining sun floated in front of him as if it were alive. Then Beckett turned his gaze. Elise. For the first time he saw the face of the woman whose voice he had listened to for so many nights, whose hand he had held in the dark, whom he had trusted with his ears and with his heart, but never with his eyes. Pale blonde hair, thin, tied back at her nape. Brown eyes bruised by sleepless nights, high cheekbones, hollow with exhaustion, and a small scar near her right temple, a mark his fingers had already memorized in the dark. Though it was small and white, it was clear to him now because his heart already knew exactly where it lay, guiding his blurred vision to the truth he had first felt with his hands. And her smile. A trembling smile, red eyes, tears running, but smiling, real, smiling with her whole face, the most beautiful smile Beckett Hale had ever seen in his life, more beautiful than any face he'd ever seen when he still had sight. Because this smile he had heard before he saw it, had believed before he knew it, had loved before he looked, Beckett cried. Tears rolled down his cheeks and dropped onto the hospital gown. And he didn't wipe them, didn't hide them, didn't turn away. The man who once ruled the city's darkest corners sat on a hospital bed crying in front of a cleaning woman and her 5-year-old daughter, and he wasn't ashamed. Penny climbed onto the bed, put the drawing into his hands, eyes shining. Mr. Beck, can you see? Can you see my picture? Beckett looked at the drawing, looked at the 3 people holding hands, looked at the word family scribbled in the corner, then looked at Penny, looked at Elise, and said in a broken, warm, honest voice, "The little girl was right. I can see again." 6 months later, Beckett Hale left the underworld. Not by a simple decision, but through a long, painful process, complicated as peeling barbed wire off a body it had been wrapped around for 20 years. There were nights Sully sat outside Beckett's door with a gun across his lap, because someone didn't want the boss to walk away in peace. There were weeks Joanna worked 18 hours a day, handling shadow contracts, legal transfers of power, negotiating with each district boss to make sure that when Beckett stepped out, no one followed. Morrison, the North Side boss, was the first to accept it. The old man nodded at the final meeting and said, "You've paid enough, Beckett. Go." One by one, the district bosses nodded, not because they loved him, but because they respected him. And in the underworld, respect sometimes had more value than love. Beckett paid in money, in property, in business ties he'd spent his whole life building. He walked out with far less than he'd once had, but far more than he needed. He bought a small house in the western suburbs of Chicago, in Riverside, 40 minutes by car from the Gold Coast mansion, but an entire world away. A 1-story home, white brick walls, a gray roof, a front yard planted with grass, a large maple tree that cast cool shade every afternoon, and a living room window facing east, where morning light poured in at 7 o'clock, pale gold and warm, falling onto the wooden floor in bright squares that Beckett stood and watched each morning with eyesight recovered to 65%. The world through his eyes was a little blurred at the edges. Fine details softened, but color was still rich, light was still clear, and he could see enough to know what color the sky was every morning and what shade the maple tree was turning each evening. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for. Elise didn't live with him. She rented a small 2-bedroom apartment, a 15-minute walk from Beckett's house, on the 2nd floor of a clean complex with a children's playground in the center and neighbors who nodded hello each morning. Beckett offered for her and Penny to move in. He had more than enough rooms, more than enough space, but Elise shook her head, gentle and firm. "I need to stand on my own feet first," she said, looking at him with brown eyes no longer ringed with the bruised shadows of sleeplessness. "My whole life I depended on other people. On Travis. On cleaning jobs. On pity. I want, for the first time in my life, that when I walk into someone's home, it's because I choose to, not because I have to." Beckett understood. He respected it. He didn't ask again. But every Saturday morning, his front door was left unlocked, and Elise walked in with Penny as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The charity foundation was born 3 months after Beckett left the underworld. He named it The Light She Carried, the light she carried with her, for abused women and abandoned children. Joanna handled the legal work, Sully managed security, and Elise, the cleaning woman who used to mop a $1 million mansion at 2 a.m, became the foundation's director. Not because Beckett handed her the position as a gift, but because no one on earth understood what women needed when they were running the way she did. The woman who had carried her daughter out of Kentucky on a 7-hour Greyhound with $200 in her pocket. Penny started at a new school in Riverside, a small public school with a green grass playground and a red-haired first-grade teacher named Miss Baker who smiled a lot. For the first time in her life, Penny had a friend, a little girl named Sophia, who sat beside her and shared cookies at recess. For the first time in her life, Penny had her own room, a small room with a twin bed dressed in pink sheets, a drawing table by the window that Beckett bought for her, and on the wall, dozens of drawings taped up with paper tape, each one a son, each one a family, each one brighter than the last because now she had real colored pencils instead of a graphite stub on old newspaper. On the last Saturday afternoon of May, Beckett stood at the living room window looking out at the yard. Penny ran across the grass chasing a yellow butterfly, her hair flying, her giggle ringing in the pale gold afternoon sun. The world through his eyes was still a little blurred at the edges, the butterfly only a small yellow smear, but Penny was clear, bright, alive, running on green grass under a blue sky, and he could see her. He could truly see. Elise stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and the two of them looked out without speaking. Silence, but not the kind of silence that had been frightening in the Gold Coast mansion. This was the silence of two people who didn't need words to understand each other. "You saved me," Beckett said softly. Elise shook her head. "Penny saved you. She walked into your room at 2 in the morning and told the truth. I only had the courage to follow my child's courage." Beckett looked at her, at the small scar near her temple that now he could see with his eyes, and not only with his fingertips, and said, "Then you taught her well." Penny ran back and hugged both their legs at once, hands smeared with green grass, cheeks red from the sun, grinning wide. "Mom, Mr. Beck, look what I drew." She held up a quick drawing on white paper and colored markers. A white-walled house with a gray roof. 3 people standing in the yard, the big maple tree beside them, and above it, a large round sun, and in the bottom corner, messy but much clearer than the old pencil words on newspaper from before, the word family. Beckett bent down, looked at the picture, then looked at Penny's collar. The small pebble wrapped in red thread hung from a cord Elise had strung for her, resting against the fabric of Penny's shirt, the pebble Penny had picked up at the schoolyard and given him that night on the mansion staircase, the one he'd returned to her after surgery because, "You need it more than I do." He touched his breast pocket. The second pebble was still there, the one Penny had found for him because, "You need one that's yours, and you're not allowed to give it back." 2 pebbles wrapped in red thread, ugly and uneven, wrapped clumsily by a 5-year-old's hands, but the most precious things Beckett Hale owned in a life full of money and power. 2 pebbles, 2 people, a family no one was born into together, but chose each other in the dark and held on to each other when the light came back. Beckett Hale used to believe that losing his sight meant losing everything. Losing power, losing trust, losing even the reason to wake up each morning. But in the deepest darkness, he found something the light had never given him. Loyalty from someone who owed him nothing. The courage of a mother who had nothing left to lose except her daughter. And the pure heart of a 5-year-old who believed a pebble wrapped in thread could heal the sadness of the whole world. This story isn't about a mafia boss, or a plot, or betrayal. This story is about something simple we often forget in the rush of life. Sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the one in control, isn't the one with the most money, or the loudest voice, but the one who dares to speak the truth when the whole world wants them silent. Elise is an ordinary mother. She scrubs floors, wrings out rags, counts every dollar to buy milk for her child. But she did what none of the powerful people around Beckett dared to do. She spoke. She chose not to become the neighbor who pulls the curtain closed. And Penny, a 5-year-old girl who doesn't know what the underworld is, who doesn't yet know what fear is, taught all of us that sometimes all it takes is a small pebble, a pencil drawing, and one sentence, "I have you," to pull a person back from the edge. Have you ever met someone like Penny in your life? Someone small who brings something big? Or have you ever been Elise, standing in front of the choice between silence for safety and speaking up for what's right? Share your story in the comments below. We always want to hear what you feel from deep in your heart, because every story you tell carries its own strength and deserves to be heard. If today's story moved you, please hit the like button so it can reach more people. Share this video with someone you love, because sometimes one story is enough to change someone's day. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe now and turn on notifications so you won't miss our stories every day. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and love. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.